But first, we got to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals overnight or late night. They officially extended Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I believe James Rappian, Bengals beat reporter. I believe he had it first before everybody, before Jordan Schultz had it exclusive. Well,
wow, because apparently the receivers told Jordan Schultz, like they fed him the info, was the tweet that I saw.
I believe James had it hours earlier, but again,
he beat the receivers to it.
I believe so. So yeah, they got to Jordan Schultz. They must have Starbucks for life or something like that to go. They went right to Jordan. Bengals extend Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, 4 years, $161 million for Chase, 4 years, $115 million for T. Higgins. Kudos to both James and Jordan for the reporting, because that's important. And this is, look, it's a big deal. We didn't know what was going to happen with Cincinnati officially, but they have both receivers locked up. GM Joe Burrow, a major feather in his cap for the GM here.
Yeah, nice work, Joe.
This is when you respond to the news that Jamar Chase and T. Higgins have been extended by the Bengals.
So now we're going to have a nuanced conversation, because people either think it's genius or it's idiotic. And obviously the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's going to be a fascinating case study, because they are now, like, in NFL history, this is the team with the most money tied up in wide receivers ever, right? Now, I don't know if that's true in a percentage term of the cap. I haven't fact checked that part, but it's basically as much money as anybody's tied up in two wide receivers before. What's fascinating to me is, so Higgins is done for under $30 million a year APY. Now, look, these are just the headline figures. We've been through this all week before, right? We don't know what the actual structure of the deal looks like yet.
Right.
But generally, T. Higgins being done for under $30 million as the headline figure a year actually feels like pretty good business to me. I thought he would have been pushing above that given where the marketplace was. But the one that jumps out is, we are over $40 million a year for Jamar Chase. Remember, a year ago, Justin Jefferson signed his deal for $35 million a year. So in that time, the salary cap has jumped 9-point-something%, and the top wide receiver headline figure has gone up 17%. So that jumps out as a little bit over the top. Jason Fitzgerald from Over the Cap tweeted at me last night. He's like, the Bengals, like, they made a rod for their own back, because they were the ones talking about best paid non-quarterback. That was the thing that they kind of made a deal of. And unfortunately, that sort of failed to see a bunch of defensive deals coming down the pike, like the Myles Garrett deal, right? If they'd simply been saying, yeah, best paid receiver, no problem, then all we got to do is beat Justin Jefferson's deal, plus whatever sort of ego is required for Jamar Chase to beat Justin Jefferson. Like, what's the appropriate amount? But when you start saying best paid non-quarterback, well, all of a sudden Myles Garrett's deal comes along and puts $5 million on the tag.
Right.
That part is interesting. But I think, look, we've had this conversation before. I don't think it is a fundamentally crazy idea to dedicate a ton of money to your top two wide receivers. Let me throw that at you. And how would you return that serve?
I agree with that. I don't think it's a crazy idea. What we've described before is you have the one quarterback, the Burrow, the Allen, the Mahomes, Lamar, whoever it is, one guy is going to make a ton of money. There's your quarterback. You got him locked up. And for the most part, you have 3 or 4 other positions you can pay the funny money to. And so you have to choose where that goes. And remember with Kansas City at one point, it was Chris Jones, but also Frank Clark, and then Jawan Taylor. Like they're moving that around. Who is their $20 million plus guy? Now it's getting up to $30 million plus.
Right.
And so choosing wide receiver 1 absolutely makes sense. The difference, I think, for Cincinnati is, instead of it being a tackle, I mean, Orlando Brown's making good money, but not this level. Instead of being a tackle or a defensive end, as of right now, it's wide receiver 2. But to me, it's not just wide receiver 2. This isn't like Corey Davis a couple of years ago. No offense to the great Corey Davis. He was like the quintessential wide receiver 2, right? If you have an A.J. Brown on one side, Corey Davis will have a nice little season. Intermediate route runner, not a deep threat, not great after the catch, just okay. It's not just another wide receiver 2. It's a high-end wide receiver 2 and a guy that half the league probably thought was wide receiver 1 for them. So the idea that these guys are together for the foreseeable future, the chemistry that they already have, that foundation's in place. And now Cincinnati, outside of, okay, who's our best wide receiver 3 year in, year out, and just kind of staying young and cheap with the rest of your receiving core, you know what you're getting into here. So I think it's perfectly fine. The bigger questions are about maybe T. Higgins specifically, some of his injury concerns, the time that he's missed. But I think having these guys out on the field, I don't see them getting older and regressing or anything. I think you've got this incredible nucleus in your passing game. And now obviously you have to make sure that the O-line is crept back toward average every year. And of course the defense has to, you have to hit on some draft picks on the defensive side of the ball. But I don't think it's crazy to have QB, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 as your foundation.
Yeah. Look, some people are out there portraying this as like a fundamental mistake of team building, right? Like it's a stupid thing you do when you're constructing Madden and you're just throwing money at your good players and blah, 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 right? But nobody, I don't think, would complain about signing Jamar Chase. Now, maybe they might, again, quibble the same way I did with the money, right? Should Jamar Chase be that much more, 17% more than Justin Jefferson? I think that's a fair argument to make. But conceptually, I don't think anybody is complaining about the idea that you lock up Jamar Chase long term, right? That's just what you should do. So really, it comes down to, given that you have Jamar Chase in the building, do you lock up T. Higgins as well, right? Yes or no? That is what people have a problem with. Now, the two things I would say is, number one, they're repped by the same person, and that almost certainly played a part in this negotiation. So if you're Cincinnati and you're trying to get this deal done, can you even get a deal done with Jamar Chase if you don't get T. Higgins done as well? That's question number one for the people being like, this is stupid, right? This is dumb management. This is bad team building. Could you have actually gotten one deal done without the other, given that they are repped by the same agent, regardless of what's going to be said now, right? Because who would put that out publicly? Yes, of course, we were like blackmailing them and, bending them over a barrel and making sure both deals were done. They're not going to say that out loud now, but that may have been the case. So point number one. Point number two, as you said, it's like there's a difference between starting from a blank sheet of paper and like optimally distributing the money where you would want it to go, which would be quarterback first, top wide receiver, Jamar Chase, top pass rusher, Trey Hendrickson. And then I think your next two would be best offensive lineman and best defensive back, I think, right? That's where an optimal team construction strategy would be, distributing the money around. But nobody starts from that. Nobody starts from the blank sheet of paper. You're always starting from this fluid roster that's a movable thing year on year. You're right. The Bengals have a reasonable amount of money tied up in Orlando Brown, but not like crazy money. The where this is taking money from, though, is right now the highest cap charge for a Bengals cornerback is $4 million, right? So they don't have a cornerback earning anything at the moment. So that's where this money is. Instead of paying CB1, and they're going to, hope that one of these guys emerges and that's not a problem area, that this money's going to T. Higgins instead, right? Which, number one, I think that would be wide receiver 2 would be like the next on my list in that optimal world anyway. Like once I'd gotten those, quarterback, wide receiver 1, pass rusher 1, offensive lineman 1, cornerback 1, the next position to me would probably be wide receiver 2 or receiver 2, whoever my next best receiver is. If he's a top level guy, that's where I would want the money going. So they've pulled it from position 5 to position 6, which is a reasonable place to go. The only question being, all right, now how do we repair a defense that was garbage last year? Like that's the issue. But like what you're asking to do, if you're saying don't do this deal, is take the money that you gave T. Higgins and throw it at defenders in free agency. And okay, could you have gotten Charvarius Ward? Would that have been a better allocation of money? Maybe, but I don't think, again, it's not like egregious stupidity.
No, I agree. And by the way, you can look, and maybe it's rosy colored because I kind of like both players and like the way they were progressing. You can look at Dax Hill and DJ Turner,
right,
as two pretty good corner options here. Dax Hill had moved to corner and was looking good there before his injury. DJ Turner was much improved in year 2 before his injury, got hurt in a game where he was lights out against the Chargers. So you could easily say, yeah, they're fine. They're okay at that particular spot. Not okay, but, not perfectly fine. But like, hey, they've got, a couple of young guys, first and second round picks that could be okay. The one thing, so Cincinnati's broken stride a little bit the last few years from what they like to do, right? Which is spend this big money, do different stuff with Joe Burrow in the building. The next thing, as a team that I believe has 6 draft picks going in this year, that's how I think you have to complement this roster with volume drafting, which is something Cincinnati doesn't generally do. They don't do a whole bunch of maneuvering around the draft. I would love to see them go from 6 to 9 or 10 picks in one of these years, because yet you have to attack the defensive line in volume. Parts of the secondary probably definitely, I would say need that depth. Offensive line in volume. The one last thing I'll say, the people that are criticizing this, saying you don't go receivers before you have the trenches sorted, it does feel like the 2021 Penei Sewell Jamar Chase conversation, where I believe the Bengals have proven that Jamar Chase was perfectly fine as the pick over Penei Sewell. They made it to a Super Bowl, almost won a Super Bowl. They've had an elite offense when these guys have been healthy, despite not having a good offensive line. So we have learned that. Like, would I want Joe Burrow getting hit the way he does and having to, be under pressure the way he has for the majority of his career? No, but they still have an elite offense here. And you can't say, well, he's been hurt. Like his wrist injury had nothing to do with the offensive line. I mean, you don't like QBs don't get hurt because they have a bad offensive line. It's mostly luck. Now you don't want them getting hit. I mean, sometimes they do, but it's not like this extra 3% of pressure was the thing that got you hurt. It's not 1-to-1. Right, exactly. So make sure the context is there when people quote tweet me like I'm an idiot. So that's my thing. Like you're paying for the known here, which is I know we're going to have a really good offense. Even if we do screw up the offensive line, we're still going to have a good offense. That's the history here for Cincinnati.
The other thing, by the way, so the defense was terrible last year, like awful. So on the one hand, you're looking at this and saying, well, they've done very, very little to a defense that was utterly atrocious last year. Like that doesn't look good on paper. On the other hand, it shouldn't have been anywhere near as bad as it was a year ago. This was largely the same group that was good before that, right? Like it fell apart randomly with no particular logic to it. Lou Anarumo got fired at the end of it. There are defenses that if you simply there's value to just changing the coach, right? So I would kind of expect this group to be better next year, even if they didn't add anybody to it. And there's still the draft to come. We're about to do a mock draft. Who knows what defenders they may get? You know what I mean? Like they haven't finished the offseason. They can still add players to this defensive group that they're not prohibited from that because they signed these 2 receivers. So, but even if they didn't add anybody, I would expect the defense to be better than it was a year ago. And even with the defense as bad as it was, you can argue the thing that kept them out of the playoffs was the one game the offense didn't show up, right? The offense didn't show up right at the start of the season against the Patriots randomly, right? Lost a game. And it's like, maybe the Patriots are actually better than we thought they were. The answer is no. The Patriots were, in fact, cheeks, but the Bengals offense didn't show up for that one game. That one game ends up being the game that doesn't get them into the postseason, right? So as bad as the defense was last year, you could argue that the one game the offense didn't show up was the thing that stopped them getting in the postseason. And if they'd made the postseason, who knows what this team could have done given the way this offense was cooking. Again, I think it's a perfectly defensible position to say we are not screwing with that three-way weapon that we have on offense with Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, particularly given 2 of them are represented by the same agent. Let's keep the nucleus together and let's work out the rest with whatever we have left over.
Last thing before we get to this all-important mock draft post-free agency style, the question about they should have done this earlier and get the money out there earlier. I think it's a fair point. The one counterpoint for T, like Chase wasn't egregious, but he was drafted the same year as Devontae Smith, right?
Yeah.
The same year. Devontae got re-signed much earlier.
Smith was wasn't Smith the year before? Smith's in the Waddle year and the Jefferson year, right?
Was he?
I don't think so.
Did I screw that up? I mean, it wasn't like egregiously late
no.
On Jamar Chase. Again,
like the comp is Justin Jefferson, right? He was drafted the year after Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson was the last like blockbusting contract. Jefferson was also wanting his money a year early, right? Like this is the thing.
No,
Chase
Devontae
has been
same year, by the way, 2021
for
Devontae.
Okay, when did he get done?
Eagles got him. They got him early, like a year early, basically.
Right, but that's the thing, right? The Eagles pay their guys early relative to the rest of the league. The Bengals didn't drag their ass on this. The Bengals just did it the way everybody else does it. and it looks bad because the Eagles got it done early. Jefferson is the comp because Jefferson was the year before and was the last guy to be like top of the market. Jefferson also wanted his money a year early. And remember, they had that thing with the Vikings. The Vikings wanted to get his deal done. They didn't get the deal done. They said, well, let's park it for the season. And I think they ended up signing him later that actual season. They didn't park it until the next offseason. They got him done in like late October, November or something. But so that's the gap, right? It's like the Vikings with the same guy in the same conversation got their deal done basically last October, November, as opposed to letting it go now. But letting it go now is like the normal timetable. The Bengals didn't like this is not a Dallas Cowboys thing where they've dragged this thing out until the last possible moment. And it's like, oh no, look what that did. Chase has basically been done along the normal timetable. The one to criticize is T. Higgins, where they franchise tagged him twice now, only to give him the big deal and been hamstrung in the negotiations because he now has the same agent as Jamar Chase. Like, this did not need to be an interconnected problem. The Bengals created an interconnected problem by how long they dithered with T. Higgins, which also, by the way, like if they'd done this a year or two ago with T. Higgins, Joe Burrow's voice wouldn't have been like chirping around in the back. Like all of the problems, like the ancillary issues with this negotiation are all because they dragged it out with T. Higgins.
Maybe, but also the money that they ended up, we gotta get moving. But the money they end up giving T. Higgins, I also wonder if he would have wanted more even a year ago. As the receivers started creeping up past 30, don't you think he could have said, hey, I'm gonna hit free agency. I'm gonna be wide receiver 1 for a lot of teams. I'm gonna be up over 30. I don't know if T. Higgins is that much cheaper. And I think the agent thing may have worked in their favor, where they were more motivated to get a deal done for Cincinnati and to be together for the foreseeable future. It may have worked.
I don't know. The other thing, by the way, I kicked this around as an idea previously. I've since checked it out with some notable cap experts. The people that say like sign your guys early, it's cheaper. It probably isn't for high-end stars because those guys, because they've signed early and they signed for the team-friendly deal because that looks great in a year or two's time, they come back to the table earlier. So you end up basically paying the same money anyway. It looks good for a while. You win the PR battle, but you don't win financially necessarily.
That was the point I was making. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more star players. Like what's AJ Brown is still
right. So the point that was made
AJ?
To me is this guy said essentially, if the guy is good enough that the deal looks cheap long term, he's going to come back to the table for more money, and you don't save money by getting them done early. The only way you actually save money is if the guy is not quite good enough that the cheap deal looks cheap. You know what I mean? Like he has to be only average, where it probably ends up working out in your favor anyway. If he's actually good enough that it's a team-friendly deal, the guy comes back to the table for more money, and you didn't save anything by getting him done early. It just looked like it for a couple of years.
And you may have for like a period of time. But again, I think Cincinnati also, they had cheaper hits this year with Higgins with Chase making almost nothing and Higgins just on the tag. AJ Brown's at $32 million a year. I mean, if a couple more guys leapfrog him, he comes back and says, hey, I'm only at $32 million a year. I want to be closer to 40, right? I mean, this is, so again, I think over time, earlier is still better, but it is not this egregious, everybody has to do it exactly how the Eagles do it because they're maneuvering cap 5-6 years in advance that other teams don't want to deal with. They don't want to have to deal with that. Right. So I still think the Eagles' way of understanding the time value of money and how much they need to spend later versus now, I get that. They do a great job with that. But not every team, it's not this egregious strategy to, not copy them,
well, getting it done, like getting your contract signed, getting your players locked up a year in advance, I don't think is necessarily the genius move, the cheat, the hack that it seems to be. But I think the contrast is that versus what the Cowboys do, right? And like drag it out until that's bad. The Cowboys like signing these guys at the last possible second where they have genuinely pushed the price up beyond sensible figures. That is bad strategy. I have no problem saying the Eagles' strategy is definitely better than that, but I don't think the Eagles' strategy of signing guys a year in advance is necessarily cheaper than guys that do it at the normal timetable because they don't get guys coming back to the table as quickly. Like it balances out. The Eagles save money quickly, like in years 2 or 3, but then in year 4, the guy wants a new deal and they end up paying more. So it probably resets. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.